Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Gates. I am your host, Yasmin. If this is your first time listening, thank you for listening. A little background information: I'm a college student who loves to cook and bake and also talk about Disney, Universal, theme parks, movies, film, music, all the fun stuff. In this particular episode, I'm going to be talking about music from TV and film and a little bit video games and also like Disney theme parks as well, but just the majority is going to be about TV and film. A little background: I was a band kid in middle school and my first year of high school, and I played the clarinet. And I've always been a fan of music, more listening to it than playing it. I did enjoy my time in band, but hearing music was a lot better for me than playing it. And I've always enjoyed classical music and music without words, like from film. But I love all genres except for country. I'm not a huge fan of country. I'm sorry to all my country fans out there, but I'm just not a fan of country. But in this episode, we're talking about music from TV and film. We're going to be talking about different composers, how the film and music relate to each other, um, how music is different when it comes to the genre that it's being portrayed in, like horror or romance, action, sci-fi, and kind of why it's important that they're a little bit different. Um, how composers will use popular songs in their movie, like Guardians of the Galaxy or Pulp Fiction and stuff like that. Also animated films as well, how they come out with hits from Frozen and Coco, um, and just different things like that. That's what we're going to be talking about in this episode. So I'll give some more background. I The first time I feel like I listened to classical music was in the movie, or not classical, but film scores was from movies like Jurassic Park, Jaws, um, Harry Potter, and a lot of Disney movies as well, like the classic Disney movies. I feel like certain composers did a very good job with those films. So for example, I'm going to be talking about Jurassic Park and John Williams because that's like one of the big ones I can think of at the moment of some good examples of a good soundtrack and to a film like that. Like I think that John Williams really did capture the feeling of being in a jungle, on an island with dinosaurs. Like the suspense of the music can really impact how you feel. Like I feel like without music and you're just watching a movie, you kind of wouldn't be as interested in it because you're just watching pictures move. But I feel like with music, it kind of adds that extra sense of emotion with the movie. Like imagine when they're on top of the trees and they're looking out in the first Jurassic Park movie and they're looking at the dinosaurs, there's that calm type music. But then when the workers are in the forest and they have the guns and they're kind of walking through, there's kind of that suspenseful music. You're like, oh, something's gonna happen. When is it gonna happen? Stuff like that. Like you're starting to feel more emotionally interested in the movie than you were if there was nothing there. And I think that's one of the reasons why I love music so much is because it adds so much to anything that you will add it to. Like you just get more interested in the movie. And for me, the movies are a little bit more interesting. Some of my favorites are La La Land. Like the music is so good in that. It's one of my favorites. Whiplash. I love jazz, so that was a really good one. And also, some of the classic songs that come from Disney music as well. I feel like they're really good. I feel like, you know, you fall in love with the movie a little bit more because you're able to have something to remember it by. And it's easy for you to remember songs than I feel like it is certain scenes from a movie because other people that have seen those movies will kind of listen to the same songs and you're like, oh, yes, I've seen that movie. I know that song and stuff like that. So I feel like, it's super important that film and music kind of go hand in hand and how that's kind of important. But some of my favorite composers are John Williams, Hans Zimmer. I also like um, the guy who did Ludwig Göransson, I think is his name, who did the Black Panther soundtrack as well. He's really good. Um, if you want to check out my movie playlist, it's on Spotify, by the way. I have a bunch of just like a bunch of movies on there if you want to check it out. But you know, John Williams is really good. Hans Zimmer, who's Michael, I hope I say his name right. Guy Gacino. He did the soundtracks for Incredibles, Ratatouille, Inside Out. Randy Newman is another one who's very popular with the Pixar. He does a lot of the Pixar stuff, Monsters Inc., um, Toy Story. Danny Elfman is another one. He did Alice in Wonderland, the live action one with Johnny Depp. He did The Night Before Christmas. He's really good too. So I have a couple of favorites. Alan Silverstreet, who did The Night Before Christmas. He's another one that I really like as well. You know, some of these, and these are some of my like off the top of my head. Some of my favorite composers from some of my favorite movies, and I've kind of gained a little bit more knowledge by listening to these composers when it comes to certain movies and the way that you can kind of pick up on how the composers do the soundtracks of the movies. Like you can kind of tell who's composing what to what film based on how they have in the past. Like their music style kind of stays the same from movie to movie, even though they may vary a little bit depending on the movie, but they kind of gravitate towards the same directors because they work well with that director and that style of movie. So it's kind of not easy for them, but they kind of know what the director's looking for when it comes to certain stuff. So once you find a director, you're kind of like, oh, I've noticed that this composer will continue to do movies with them, and the music will kind of be consistent throughout those movies. But those are some of my favorite composers. And of course, they've done a bunch of movies. John Williams has done Jurassic Park, Jaws, like some of the classic blockbuster movies that are at the top of like the IMDb list and stuff like that. And then there's also newer composers like Ludwig Workinson, I think is his name, who's done the soundtrack for Black Panther. And you know, he's another one. He's like right now my favorite. Like Ludwig, he's done a really good job with all the, excuse me, with all the Black Panther movies and kind of like he really does like I remember watching a documentary on him about how he will go to these places and look up how they do music there. Like when he was doing the stuff for Black Panther, he went to Africa and looked up the different styles of music and how they did it and kind of took it and add a little bit more to it for the Black Panther films. And I thought that was really great. I love when people go out and do a little bit of research on what they're um, going to do for their work. I think that's super cool that they take the time to do that. So that's why he's one of my favorites at the moment. I suggest you check him out. The Black Panther albums, the first one and the second one are really good. I love the music from them. The first one was really good. The different songs, you know, the beats, it mixes like kind of that traditional, I think, African music with some of the hip hop current beats of the African American community. And I did enjoy the music. I mean, that was one of my favorite parts besides the whole film in a whole, but the music was definitely up there. Um, and with these different composers, they are telling a story with the music. Because I feel like if you didn't have the music, you would just be watching pictures. This is my opinion, but I think that the music does add a lot to a film um, when you're listening to it. Because let's just say, for example, in Jurassic Park, when the music kind of gets soft and the notes are a little harsh, you can kind of tell that something suspenseful is coming up. But when the notes flow from one to the other very smoothly, and the sound is very light, and you know it seems like oh something good is coming, or they're looking at a sunset, or it's like the nice dinosaurs in the on the island are coming. Like it's not some like you can kind of tell what's gonna come and like how you're gonna feel when you're watching these scenes. And I think that that's why music is so super important for these types of films because it helps portray how the director wants you to feel in certain scenes. Like in La La Land when Mia is dancing with Ryan Gosling's character. I can't remember his name, but when they're dancing on that hill after they meet at that party, that dance, that whole song is very upbeat and like very like whimsical because they're just meeting for the first time, they're starting something new, and then kind of as the movie progresses, the songs kind of get slower and like more calm and more like as their relationship gets into the best part, it's more magical. But then as it starts to go separate, you can kind of tell that they're going their own ways because the music is kind of changing in that way. So, I think that that's like how directors can lean on music to help portray how their films want to be for the audience. So, I just think that that's important too for film. And then there's a bunch of different genres that are included in this, like horror, romance, action, sci-fi. You know, if you watch different movies under these categories, you can kind of hear the differences. Like horror, I feel like the music will be intense at certain times when certain scenes are coming up, like when the villain in the movie is kind of in the shot, you can kind of hear how the music is more tense. And then like when excuse me, something is about to happen, like the music can kind of get soft and then get harsh right at the end when something's gonna happen. And romantic movies are more whimsical. They have the violins. They're more soft. Like it sounds like you're floating on clouds, like stuff like that. For action, it's kind of like if you listen to the Iron Man soundtracks, it's kind of like that. Like everything is strong and powerful. Like you can kind of sense these emotions from the type of music that you're listening to when you're watching these movies. Like they sound very like in Iron Man, the music sounds very heroic when he does something. Um, and when there is a climax building, when he's in the third movie, when he's in the shed building the stuff with the kid, like the music is building. And sometimes it'll build to, when they're done and they're ready. And sometimes it'll stop and there'll be like a comedic beat and then it'll keep going. But I think that just depends on the director. And then sci-fi, like the way that they use very, I think they rely very heavy on like the techno stuff because that does sound very futuristic and it sounds like you're in space and certain sounds. I feel like for Star Trek and Star Wars, you know, I feel like for Star Wars when they do the opening for every single movie, it starts off slow and then it booms and then and then like it's very classic. Like we all know the scores and you can tell. But sometimes with certain parts of the song, it sounds like you're floating in space or like you're moving and like it sounds like you're in the movie, which I love, and I think it just depends on what kind of movie you're watching and what you like. You're gonna hear different things from each genre because with these things, you want to hear something a little different. You don't want to hear the same thing over and over again from like whether it's the same composer or not. Like to hear a nice whimsical song when something scary is happening doesn't really make sense, and you want to hear something a little bit new every single time because you're always on the lookout for something new. Like I feel like your ears get used to certain sounds, and every time you hear a new score, you get hooked on it, and then you just want to keep listening to it over and over again. And that sometimes is what happens to me. Like I'll watch a movie, hear a song, and then go down the rabbit hole of that song, who composed it, what else they've made, and stuff like that. Like I feel like composers kind of have fun whenever they jump from genre to genre because they're able to do a little bit different, something different from probably what they're used to. Um, and I think that difference is kind of important when you're watching movies and stuff, because you can recognize each category by the music that is portrayed by. So, like romantic and horror, you can kind of tell the difference when it comes to who's composing it, and kind of how they're doing it. And the same thing with sci-fi and action, like those two may intertwine a little bit here and there, and the same thing with romance and horror. Like all of these categories may intertwine, but if you're watching those movies on their own, you can kind of tell how it's being composed and the style that they're using and how different they are on their own. And I think that that's why it's important that each of these films kind of have their own distinct sound. Um, and then some directors will use like other categories, like they'll use more popular songs or they'll use like songs made by certain artists for the movie. I think it just depends. Like for Black Panther, Kendrick Lamar did a soundtrack for um the first movie, and he had a bunch of other artists on there, and they played one song in the scene where they're fighting in the casino and stuff, and I think that Kendrick Lamar did a really good job with it. I think that it was done really well. And I just thought that, like, I think that it's not fun when composers decide to say, hey, we'll bring on an outside artist, and whether it's a rap artist, a pop artist, whatever, to come and help do the soundtrack because they would do a good job doing it. And they kind of have their own take on some of my music or whatever. I know that Beyonce did the one for The Lion King. Um, I feel like Trolls is a mix. It's a mix of pop. That is more like of popular songs that are brought into movie, but kind of the words are translated a little bit different for the movie. Like Trolls is a good one to kind of listen to because they take pop and they kind of rely on it a lot when it comes to the movie. They use the songs in certain scenes to kind of keep the story moving along and stuff like that. And I think that that's really funny. Um, all of the movies are really good. I think there's four of them, maybe three. I don't know. I don't remember. I feel like they just keep making more, but I think that those are good. And also, Guardians of the Galaxy, they kind of do the same thing. The main character, he has a little music box, a tape recorder, and he has music from the 80s and stuff, and he'll play it in the movie sometimes during fighting scenes, sometimes during the romantic scenes, and I like when directors take older songs that maybe the newer generations probably don't know, and they kind of make those songs popular again and say, hey, these were the classics. These are kind of, the hits of that time, and this music is, probably beneficial for the scene because it helps portray the character a little bit better. I feel like you kind of get a sense of who that main character is in that movie. When a certain character finds a song that they like, you can kind of, and they play it, whether it's a pop song or whether the song was made for the movie or whatever, you can kind of say, like, hey, this character has a real life connection to the people that are watching it or whatever. Like, you can kind of help portray the character a little bit better, in my opinion. I think that's one of the things I gained from when directors and composers start adding music from pop culture, whatever. Like for Barbie, I think it fit very well that they had Dua Lipa do the pop songs and Billie Eilish kind of do the slower songs. I think that that really fit well because we all know Dua Lipa has to be like the pop person, the one with the hits and the house music, and very much like music to remember. Lizzo as well, and also Billie Eilish. She makes more of like the slower songs, the lower songs when it comes to sound, and she's good at portraying emotion. So when like the scenes come up where Barbie is more going through that like self-recognition stuff and they have Billie Eilish playing it, you can kind of like you as the watcher can feel more connected to the movie when music like that comes up because you can relate to that scene. Like, oh, I've been there, and the music helps you feel more emotional with the character, and towards the character as well. So I think that, you know, it's it's very interesting and very cool when directors add popular music into the movies to make it seem to give the character more depth. Um, and the soundtracks, I think I like listening to a little bit more than the scores themselves, depending on the director and the composer. Um, like I think it's fun when the credits are rolling and there's a pop song playing and you're like, oh, what song is this? And they've done it just for the movie, and you're like, oh, that's cool. I didn't know that they did it. Like how Pharrell Williams, does some of the songs for Despicable Me, and then for the newer one, The Rise of Gru, um, they had a whole album with different uh artists come out, and basically they played those songs in the movie as well. And you kind of like, oh, I didn't know that he did it for that. Like you kind of get excited about it. Um, and I think that, sometimes when you hear it in the movies, the soundtracks by these artists, it's kind of important because it's bringing attention to that artist because the directors and the composers gave that artist a chance to share some of the stuff in the movie. And it kind of helps carry the story along, I think, like how, again, Kendrick Lamar, Black Panther, that fighting scene, that song is very upbeat, very poppy, and very much him. And I think that that fit very well in that scene because, and then it leads to a car chase. His music is very fast paced, and I think that it helped portray the story in the movie a little bit better. Uh, and again, Trolls too, whenever they do the pop songs, they're carrying on the story and stuff like that. They keep moving along and everything. So I think that, soundtracks are super important to the movie. And then the scores are kind of like the base of the movie, like kind of like like the starting point of like what you hear from beginning to end, like kind of just keeping you along with the story, whether it's loud or not. Like you can kind of always hear a faint noise, and it's always the music. Um, and then in animation, I feel like when it comes to animation, I think you can either go one of two ways. You can either go the musical route or just have more background noise. A lot of Disney films are going the musical way where every 15 minutes they're singing a song. Like in Encanto and Frozen, these characters are singing songs in Coco. And I think that Disney heavily relies on that. But Pixar, not so much. Pixar, they more do the background where they don't really have someone singing a song every 5 minutes. They have more how movies are where they have low songs when nothing's happening, then it gets high when something's going on, and then like just that kind of wave of sound. I think that Pixar does that. Like they don't, and then they have sometimes like in Toy Story, Randy Newman, he'll come in and sing a couple songs as the background when the characters aren't talking. It's just him singing a quick song, and that's about it. But what Pixar does is they'll show scenes and just play the music with no dialogue. And I think that that's the part where you start to remember some of the songs from the movies. Like in the beginning of Monsters Inc., you have all the doors coming in, and it's just the music, and you kind of getting the setup for what the movie is about, which I think that is super cool. Um, and for Brave, you have different artists coming and singing a couple songs. Like Miranda herself has been singing, but the artists are singing songs about what's going on in the movie and emotionally how she's feeling. Like when she's riding the horse and running through the woods, one of the lyrics that I can remember is like, I can run, I can fly, I can reach the wind and touch the sky. Like Miranda wants that sense of freedom. And so I think that the song in that scene is very good because it's portraying that Miranda wants to just do her own thing um, and just be very independent without like the dependency of her mother who wants so much for her, and Miranda doesn't see it in the moment. But things like that I think are super important. And I love that animated movies when, I like both when they sing classic songs like in Little Mermaid, and also when they have other artists come in and sing songs during these scenes that are important for the character to progress throughout the movie. Um, and then of course in the Disney movies you get the classic hits like The Lion King, uh, can't can't wait to be king, and then you have the Little Mermaid songs, Part of Your World, you have Aladdin, you have all Beauty and the Beast, like you have all these very classic songs that again, sometimes the character themselves are singing or someone else is singing the song overlaying on the movie. So like for Beauty and the Beast, when Mrs. Potts is kind of in the background, they show a couple shots of her, but she's kind of in the background. It's more the focus on Belle and the Beast when they're dancing in the main like ballroom, and she's in that beautiful yellow dress, and she's kind of setting the scene for like this classic music for them to waltz to, you know, and it kind of makes you feel that very much like a romantic scene, whether they do anything romantic or not, like, just because of the music and the setting and everything, it's very romantic. But I think that, and yeah, animation could go one or two ways, a musical or, you know, with the music in the background, like for the Studio Ghibli films as well, they do a fantastic job with the music. I love the music in that uh in those films. The composer is amazing. I love him, like his music. And I feel that that kind of animation is a little different than American animation because that is, I think, Asian. I don't want to say a specific place. I'm just gonna say Asian in general. It's an Asian production studio and a composer and all that. So I think that they do things a little bit different over there. But with certain movies like Howl's Moving Castle, there are certain scenes where, like when they're floating in air, like the music is whimsical, and and that I have it playing in my head now. Like the music is amazing, and then when something is about to happen, and you can kind of tell the music will build, 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 and then it'll go whimsical, and they do it so well. And that's another one of my favorites. Um, but I think that animation, because they can move the characters so smoothly, the music can kind of go with that as well. And sometimes when the characters are fighting and they get harsh, the music can get harsh, and I think that it works hand in hand with each other. I think that some animation does really well with the music, like some of the classics, like 101 Dalmatians and Aristocrats, and then some of the newer music like Wish and Encanto, Frozen. You know, I feel like it's it works hand in hand. Like some of the time, you're like, oh, not this song. Like as you hear it on your own, but I feel like when you watch it in the movie, you're like, oh, okay, I get why the song is like this. Like when uh, Let It Go. Like everybody has heard Let It Go. If you have not, I bet you have. But Let It Go, like when you're listening to it over and over again, you're like, oh, enough of this. But when you saw it, I feel like for the first time, if you're very in tune with music and movies, when you saw it for the first time when she was going up the stairs, you kind of got why, that song was meant for that part of the movie, and also Show Yourself and Frozen 2. That's one of my favorites when she is trying to get to that island, and she's crossing over these huge waves, and the music is like every time she hits a wave, there's a crash with the music, and you can kind of feel that you can kind of see it. And and then when she gets past the waves, the music goes soft and she's getting closer and closer to the island, the music starts building for that song. And she's singing the song, and as she gets closer and closer to the center where she's gonna meet her mom, it's building. And then when she gets to the big cave and all the lights show up, there's a big like not bang, but everything in the orchestra plays at once, and it feels like everything's been revealed. Like there's a couple notes in there where all the orchestra plays and then the song continues but louder because she finally made it or whatever. I think that that's another good example of animation and music working hand in hand. Um, I'm trying like underrated. I don't know, underrated music. I kind of only listen to the popular music, like I feel like underrated music in entertainment would be video games. Like I feel like a lot of people don't listen to the music in video games when things are kind of going on. I've because I have brothers and male cousins, they kind of play video games a lot. I kind of hear the sound, the music, and sometimes I'll poke my head and I'm like, what is that? Like, what are you playing? Because like for the Spider-Man games, the music is really good. it sounds like movie music and it's not, it's for a video game. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's really good. And sometimes these independent artists will come out like very like low key, I feel like independent artists will come out and do songs for these video games and I'm like, you should be doing music like outside of video games. Like this music is actually really good, and Grand Theft Auto, like that kind of LA music. Well, I'm talking about the LA game in specific, but because that's the one I've heard the most. I feel like they did a really good job with that. Like it sounds like, you know, LA music, and I feel like you're kind of hit with that traditional uh it's like the video game music is a little more interesting because I feel like with video games you could easily make it sound like Mario in a way, like very much like a 2-bit like robotic stuff. But I feel like a lot of the times they don't do that. Like with some of these games, for Cuphead, it's very much jazz music. I love it. Like I love the Cuphead soundtrack. It's super good, and I watched a couple videos on the jazz band that was doing it or whatever, and with each song, there's a different scene in the background, and it's very much like what Fallout is set in, like that time period. I don't know, what is that? I want to say like 50s, 40s, like is when it's supposed to be like that type of music, jazz music. I feel like they do a very good job with that, you know. And I could kind of picture with that music, I could kind of see how it fits in with the game, because the characters are doing a lot and they have a short amount of time with each level, and you kind of have to find something that sticks out when you're playing to keep you entertained and not just staring at the screen. Because I feel like without some sort of background noise with the characters on the screen, you're gonna kind of get lost and kind of feel like bored. Like you're just, again, with the movies too, like just staring at a screen with a bunch of people moving and talking. I feel like when you add music to a fight scene in a video game, you're adding a little bit more to keep the people entertained. And I think that that's important. And then, like, in Zelda, when they're traveling and they get to the tallest mountain, like, there's a song that plays, and like, you can kind of hear the wind too. Like, there's a lot in it, that builds and everything and that comes together in those certain scenes. And I think that that's super cool. And then there are some games like Mario that take the route of being very much like not robotic, but very like techno robotic, very like computerized. Like, yes, we did this with the computer, but then also some of the other like Mario Kart, they use a whole orchestra. And for these like 30-second games, I'm like it's so funny to me that they have all this orchestra for such a small game. But the fact that they put so much effort into it is super cool. Like I've watched videos on YouTube of the orchestras doing songs for video games, and they put so much work, and the song is maybe 2 minutes long. And on the video game, sometimes the songs will be played for 10 to 30 seconds, like not even that long. And it's very interesting that they put all this effort into it as if they were making a movie soundtrack, or movie score. Um, but again, I think that if you do a deep dive into um, game music when it comes to video game, computer games, whatever kind of game like you're listening to, I think, or playing, I feel like if you go into a deep dive of this music, you're gonna realize how much good music there is out there, and like for Ready Player One, that's a video game, but it's a movie about a video game. So I think that it mixes the two between video game music and regular like classic film music, you know. And I think that that's an interesting mix between the two. Um, and sometimes TV as well. Like sometimes they'll do themed episodes with stuff from video games, and sometimes they'll include the music, sometimes they won't, From video games, I feel like then you start to branch out to like the interactive games that they have on Netflix or whatever, you know. I think that it's cool that we've gotten to that point where the music can change that fast. Like, let's just say, I know that there's like a Puss in Boots one, I think, on Netflix where you can go from he's doing super well and then all of a sudden something bad happens, the music can change that fast and I personally have not done one of those immersive experience like type games or whatever, but I've heard that they're good, and I feel like based on some of my other music knowledge, that it's a very interesting change. That composers will have to make up music for each individual scene, depending on what the person picks. Like they could pick so many different options, and there's a song for each one. Um, and I feel like that's it. That's interesting to see that way. That's where we're headed with, you know, music when it comes to background for TV. And for TV in general, I feel like there's always like the theme song of the TV show, like Zack and Cody, Narcos, whatever. You kind of know the theme song for that. And then occasionally they'll have artists sing certain songs in the movies, or they'll sing pop culture songs in the TV show. And again, I feel like the TV music is probably a little bit different because, they have to do it for a longer period of time than, let's just say, movie, but sometimes TV doesn't even have music in the back. It's more the scenes. Like I know that in Modern Family they do the theme song and then that's it. You know, like there's not really music unless the characters themselves are singing or playing it. There's no really like soundtrack unless you have or compile one yourself of the characters singing. Like there's no really background noise sound, score for TV. You kind of do more for um, what's it called? You kind of have one more for the characters themselves than you do the TV show. Um, and I think that that's interesting as well, that like you can still be intrigued with the TV show, but I think that that's because the stories are shorter and they don't have to carry as much in each episode. Like most TV shows are about 20 to 40 minutes long. I feel like on the long end, an hour, depending on what show you watch, you know. Like in Grey's Anatomy, I doubt they play music. I haven't watched it, but I don't think they play music in any of the episodes. It's more if the characters sing or play music themselves. Like, but you're still intrigued, and like that's because of the storyline. I think that sometimes in movies, it's a little easier to play music because the storyline needs it, and they're compensating for that. But in TV, the characters are talking so much that there's no room for music. And that's just from watching hundreds and hundreds of shows. And a little bit of YouTube in there too is that sometimes YouTubers will put songs again when they're not talking. They'll kind of play it in the quiet parts of their videos. So when they are talking, the music will be lowered and then it's the music and like you can barely hear it. And the YouTubers themselves are talking and stuff. And I find those videos a little interesting. Like there's this one video I'll watch, it's an hour long, and it's of this girl who is in Italy, and whenever she is talking, she'll put captions, but keep the music the same. But the music is like classic, like Italian music, and it's super good. Like I'm intrigued the whole time, and she doesn't even have to talk, and it's so intriguing for me. And I kind of enjoy that too. But I also do like when like teachers talk or whatever. But again, for TV shows, I feel like it's a little different when it comes to music in the shows themselves because there's just so much talking, in my opinion, amongst the show. But like so Bridgerton, for example, I haven't watched it, but I've seen clips in here and there. I know that they incorporate a lot of pop culture songs, but with a classical style. I think that that's funny. Um, but again, I feel like they do it a little bit differently. I feel like the Netflix shows do it a little bit differently, but they do have music in their shows, you know, like during the intense parts or during when they're cutting between scenes, they'll play a little bit of music here and there for a lot of the shows, I realized. But I think that that's kind of like a transition for them is to play music in between those cutting scenes. Um, but other than that, I rarely hear like scores in TV shows unless it's like a spin-off from a movie. It's very rare that I'll hear it. And, it's kind of interesting that that happens. Um, so I just would love to see more scores in TV shows, but I kind of get it why it's not in it because I feel like it would be too much. Because with the talking, with the singing, and you're only in there for a short amount of time, like it's kind of hard to do both. And I think that they more rely on the talking than they do the music, which makes more sense to me. Um, and with that, the last topic I'm going to kind of be talking about is documentary films. Um, it's very rare that I'll hear an original score for documentaries. The documentaries I watch are ones for like TV and movie because I and like music. Like I watched the Quincy Jones documentary, that was really good. I watched the Bee Gees one. I watched ones about comedians. I've seen one about Mary Tyler Moore. Like I've seen a bunch, you know. And if anything, the soundtrack is more of like if it's talking about a uh producer or an artist like Quincy Jones, they're showing more his personal music than they are than they are like a original score. Like from here to there, you'll hear some songs that are the original score, but I feel like it's only like a couple songs. I feel like most of the time when you're listening, when you're watching documentaries like that based on like a musical artist or something or a movie person, you're kind of hearing more their personal work in the documentary than you are something else, which I do enjoy because then you'll sometimes hear hits of theirs or you'll hear more quieter songs of theirs that aren't really known as that. And I think that it's a mix, but those also kind of tell a story because they wrote it themselves in certain times of their life and they're talking about it again. Those songs will come up and it'll just progress the story of that documentary because whether it's a documentary, a mockumentary, or whatever, it's still trying to move the story along from where they started to where they ended up. Um, and I think that documentary music really is a little bit different. It's its own category, of the type of music because, again, like the beginning might be very light depending on the person, like they had a great childhood, whatever, whatever. And then as the teenage years the music gets darker because they might have had a dark period when they were teenagers and young adult. And then it got better when they met their significant other, whatever, and the music was high again. And when they had kids, and then it goes down towards the end of their career when a family member dies or whatever, whatever. So the music still portrays the story because it is still a story. They're trying to get from point A to point B, you know. And I think that they do it a little differently uh, when it comes to that stuff. When it comes to documentaries, I think that music is done a little differently. Like Quincy Jones, I remember in his, they had Chaka Khan do a song, they had a whole soundtrack for the movie, not a score, but a soundtrack where other artists would perform for different background scenes when he was talking about his life, But I feel like you're going to hear more scores than you are soundtrack. I mean, no, sorry. You're going to hear more soundtracks than you would a score when it comes to, documentary and stuff like that. And with that, I leave you. That was some music some information about music, or opinion, I should say, about how I feel about music and TV and film. And I talked a little bit more about film than I probably wanted to, but TV, I feel like it's short enough to where you don't have to talk about it too much. But film, there's just so much going on with film from the first movie made to the most recent movie made or new movies coming out and stuff like that. I feel like the music industry is changing when it comes to that all the time. And it's just too much to talk about in a short podcast. It would have to be more than one episode. I feel like if we were really going in depth for this stuff. Um, but I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, learned a little something about me, about music, about TV, about composers, kind of getting, general information. Um, and a bunch of my family plays music. I forgot to mention that at the beginning, but I have family members playing the piano, the drums, saxophone, the guitars, the bass, everything. So, I've always had music influence, and I think that this was a good topic to talk about. And I really did enjoy, talking about music because I love it. I listen to it all the time when I bike to work, when I'm doing daily things, getting ready, whatever, and just the different types of music you can listen to is very interesting. But I hope you all enjoyed this episode. Sorry we came out a little bit later than scheduled, but we came with an episode today. And I hope that you can stick around for more, enjoy more episodes, listen to our past episodes. We're coming out with episodes every Monday. Even though this week we fell behind, we're now on YouTube. It's just the audio and the video. I haven't had a good setup yet, but we're getting there. Um, but I hope you all enjoyed this episode. Please check us out on Instagram at Beyond the Gates, on Spotify and YouTube, the same Beyond the Gates. We're there now live. So if you enjoyed this episode, please give us a like, subscribe, follow us on all those platforms, and suggest future episodes if you're interested in hearing me talk about something that has to do with theme parks, any updates, um, ride reviews, stuff like that, food reviews, any stuff with new movies coming out, whether they're Disney or not, uh, new music coming out that relates to film, just let me know and I'll look at the comments and see what you guys think. So with that, thank you so much for listening. Hear you all, and see you all in the next episode.